Although I'm now getting rather long in the tooth, and soon enough it will be my turn to be sent to the glue factory. Believe it or not, once upon a time I was a fresh-faced 19-year-old ready to head to university and chase my dreams. So what happened? Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. I am Sam and I make videos about autism, neurodiversity and a few other topics of interest. If you like that sort of thing, please subscribe to my channel to stay updated when I make new videos. Back in 2005, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, I headed off to university at the University of York to study psychology. This was a huge change and a big life experience for me, as it is for anyone, I think. But I suspect being autistic and being undiagnosed at the time gave me some distinct challenges during those 3 years. But first of all, I don't want this to be a rant. I'm not saying it was all bad. Parts of it were really, really good. The fact that I was finally able to study psychology, which wasn't offered in my school, was a huge bonus for me because it meant that I could finally dive deeply into a subject that I really cared about. It was the first time that I'd really been set up to learn how to learn, rather than just learning the subject. And this is a skill that has benefited me greatly ever since I left university, where I've been essentially learning about all kinds of different subjects. It was the first time I actually pursued an academic special interest, rather than a special interest in my teenage years, which were mostly related to the TV programs that I was interested in at the time. Special interests can be one of the most rewarding things about being autistic. But while I've always been able to learn relatively easy and pass exams, being forced to do subjects and assignments that I had little interest in really drained my motivation, and as a result, my ability to organize my workload. I don't know whether it was my course or the university or maybe a combination of those factors, but the fact that I was able to do one subject made me far less stressed than I ever was during my GCSE or A-level years. I was always kind of surprised at the comparatively little amount of work that I was expected to produce, but I think this gave me an opportunity to become really passionate about the subject. The pursuit of interesting things is a real motivator for me, and I'm glad the department gave me that opportunity to become interested and not just to churn out essay after essay. I think if I had been diagnosed back then, there would have been more support for me, not just specific support groups for autistic people, of which there are now at the University of York. There's a group called Spectrum, but also the mental health team might have been a little bit more helpful in my case. But this is all just speculation now, so let's go on to the bad. So as a young 19-year-old, I was really into travel and adventure. I really liked doing new things and seeing the world and all that kind of jazz, but it never occurred to me that I did in some respects thrive on the routine of school. So the lack of routine at university was quite hard for me. Now this really varies from course to course. Some universities and courses will schedule you full-time, 40 hours a week. You're expected to be in labs, in this and that. And then some will give you 4 hours a week of lectures and then you're forced to do the rest on your own. And my course was somewhere in the middle. We had about 20 hours a week of scheduled classes and then the rest of it was reading and our own research time. But despite the fact that I enjoyed the subject deeply, I simply could not organize myself. And I had no idea why. So I just continued the narrative that I was a procrastinator, I was lazy, I was useless. As you can imagine, this didn't do much for my mental health at the time. My daily time management was awful unless I had specific lectures to attend. I had simply never learned and implemented the skills required to organize a huge chunk of your own time because my school experience had been absolutely jam-packed from morning to night. So the way that I got things done was fitting them in wherever there was time. And that's not really a sustainable strategy, that's more of a survival technique. But once you take away those time constraints, you take away the structure of the whole day. There wasn't really much support for this kind of thing specifically. It was kind of a sink or swim type of situation. And I swam, so I did get through, but it was hard, and I really wish there'd been someone who could have helped me plan my day out, organize my assignments and things like that. Because that's key life stuff that I really struggled with, and still do to this day. I really do think that getting my autism diagnosis back then would have helped me a lot, because it would have helped me realize that writing essays right up until the deadline on that day, first of all, that's not healthy for me, and second of all, that doesn't make it an intrinsic character flaw of some kind. You know, I was ill a lot at university because I had undiagnosed celiac disease, and so I also used to beg professors for extended deadlines, but it was exhausting. And I really beat myself up over it. So I think that if you're at university or about to start university, that this is really something that you should consider, especially with regards to whether or not to pursue a diagnosis. Obviously, executive functioning difficulties like what I've described are very common with those with ADD or ADHD as well. So there is quite a chunk of people who struggle with this, and I think that there should be some sort of dedicated support team for those specific struggles. So I know what you're really here for, the ugly. There was quite some ugly at university, I'm not gonna lie. So let's start with the social experience. Now, apart from my direct family, my primary influences growing up had been characters that I'd seen in film, television, and to some extent literature. I feel old as the hills saying this, but there was no YouTube back then. And so you didn't have people sharing their experiences like you do now. Honestly, the idea that I had of university, that it was full of maybe slightly pretentious people wearing hats, writing beat poetry about Nietzsche, debating philosophy in pubs, that sort of thing. But this expectation set me up for a lot of disappointment, and much of the time I felt really alone. What I wanted was an intellectual paradise, where we would endlessly philosophize about a variety of interesting subjects. Sort of like The Secret History, but without the murder bit. But those who were like that were in their rooms studying, and those people who were out socializing were not like that at all. Now I know what you're thinking, me, an autist, socializing? Why yes. I masked heavily at university, and masking was probably part of the problem in the first place. You see, throughout my days at secondary school, I had built up this internal narrative that I was the problem, and that the way that I naturally wasn't right. So the social skills I learned upon leaving school were based around the idea that a successful person is hypersocial, tons of friends, partying all the time. And I know some of you might find that completely ridiculous, but that's what I believed. I believed that being shy and introverted and taking my time to think about things, I believed that was a character flaw, and I believed that was something that I needed to change in myself. The thing is, if I wasn't this hypersocial, popular, party-ish girl, party girl, I don't think I've ever been described as a party girl, but for a year of my life I pretended to be. If that wasn't me, then who was I? And the problem was that if that wasn't me, then I was back to the shy, awkward 13-year-old, and I didn't want to be her anymore. So forcing myself to socialize excessively and participate in the binge drinking culture at the time was extremely detrimental to my mental health. It doesn't help that while kids are mean, young adults might actually be worse, and there are no consequences for bullying type behavior once you leave school. In fact, it'll follow you right up that corporate ladder. So Facebook, Facebook. I got access to Facebook at the end of my first year at university, and I was exceptionally depressed at the time. And that was when I received a message from someone in my halls telling me they wished I would go kill myself. And they really hoped that I would die. I remember reporting this to someone or other, you know, the person in charge of mental health, and their response was basically like, oh, this is how you block them on Facebook. And I'm like, well, that's not really the problem, but thanks. But my mental health really suffered hugely. Obviously, not just as a result of that. That's kind of like a funny anecdote that I can laugh about 15 years later. But obviously, with regards to mental health, drinking heavily doesn't help with that. Eating rubbish food doesn't help with that. Masking furiously and surrounding yourself with people who did not have your back, all of these things did not help. I can't help but look back at that time and think, what could I have done differently? Obviously, hindsight is 20/20, and it's unkind of me to expect that I would have come out of kind of a privileged and sheltered environment. You know, I went to an all-girls boarding school. It was kind of nerdy, actually. But having that upbringing and being undiagnosed autistic, I wouldn't really expect me to understand how the wider world works in that kind of way. And I remember people used to say to me, oh, you just need to find your people. But it really wasn't a lack of effort that made it so hard to connect with people. Perhaps if I'd been diagnosed and there was an autistic community at the time, then I might have stood a chance. But I ploughed on through. I probably over-socialized and burnt myself out, and left no room for enjoyment for the 3 years that I was there. My advice for 19-year-old Sam heading to university, and it may not apply to you, but this is what I want to say to myself. Be kind to yourself and know that your difference is not a personal failure. Take better care of your body. Don't feel the need to try and be friends with everyone. And establish routines for yourself. Now, I don't know if sharing this story has helped to anyone, but if I can help just one person, then I've done my job. If you want more videos on autism and neurodiversity, then I have a whole playlist, so click here, right here, and I'll see you next time.